podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How We're the Podcast. And once again, we have an opportunity to have a trip down memory lane. You may or may not have seen recently that another book has just been released about a period in the history of Sunderland AFC. And this one is from the author of the acclaimed Give Us Tomorrow Now, which brilliantly took us through Alan Durban's time at the club. But this one goes back a little further and is titled A Fistful of Doldrums, a view from the northeast hotbed, 1977 to 79. And here to talk about his new book, we are privileged to be speaking to the author, David Snowdon. Welcome, David.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, start off by saying congratulations on the book. I'm holding it up here and in the screen. Obviously, listeners can't see that, but I consumed it in two sittings over the bank holiday weekend. So, how long was it in the making?
Probably rough figure would be probably 18 months. Not a great deal was necessary on the research side. I wasn't starting from a cold start. I wasn't starting from scratch because I lived the era, and a lot of it's wired into the brain already. But I had to do some supplementary, more detailed research. Yeah.
Well, that's it. It's a bit bizarre, isn't it? Because I'm the same. If somebody asks me out, when we played Chelsea in 1990, I remember Colin Pascoe looped a header over the top and into the corner, and we won 1-0. But I can't remember what happened yesterday. So it's a bit odd that way, isn't it? Yeah, when you get memories of football.
It's the same with me. I was there actually. I was still going then. So I remember 1-0 Chelsea, 1-0 Nottingham Forest, etc., etc.
Just you name a player from that year, I can tell you his history. But like I said, talk about when the kids have got PE next, and I couldn't tell you. But yeah. So your last one was on Alan Durban, and what made you go back a little further? I mean, had you always had these kind of periods in mind that you wanted to specifically cover?
I regard my speciality period as approximately 73 to the end of the 80s. I was still going in the 90s, but I would say I would class that as my speciality period. I also do like to, perhaps it's just my nature, but I like to delve into and write about topics and eras that I feel have been either wrongfully neglected or just simply have not been done to death. I mean, I would never write about, say, the 73 Cup final era, and I think a definitive version has already been produced by that very fine author, Lance Hardy, which is an excellent book. Anyway, so I wouldn't be wanting to regurgitate. But then, having said that, not just going to broach a new topic for the sake of it because it hasn't been done before. It has to be something that I find personally fascinating myself. Otherwise, I'm not going to spend 1 to 2 years sort of bogged down on something that I find as a chore. And hopefully there's enough people out there who'll be similarly inclined and find either the topic fascinating or the way I've approached it. I'm not saying the word unique is an overused term, so I'm not going to say my writing style is unique, but I think at times I do like to be a little bit different.
Well, that's it. And, you're talking about the research and you talking about it all being in your head. I mean, I imagine, because I haven't read through it, I imagine most of the research came from looking, because you go into kind of around the time of specific games and you're looking at what came out on the TV that week or what was number one that week. I mean, was that actually most of your research?
Mostly. But however, if I give you an example, I could tell you that this isn't research, you couldn't research it, but when Sunderland played Wolverhampton Wanderers in September 1981 under the Alan Durban era, that Dr. Feelgood, Milk and Alcohol, was playing over the tannoy. I could tell you on February the 10th, 1982, at the half-time against Stoke City, that Golden Brown from the Stranglers was on, and the John Giles Band centrefold. I could tell you so stuff like that. Right? But what was on specifically that week, if I say Cheggers Plays Pop had its first airing on this Monday, I've done that for research, or The Professionals aired on this day, in New Year 1978. I just stumbled on that. That's not in my brain.
Yeah. Well, I suppose at this point it's worth me kind of admitting that I wasn't born around this time. I wasn't born until 1983, so a little bit later than the period we're talking about. But it's one of the reasons, of course, I find it so fascinating, because it was a period that I wasn't around for, and like you said, I don't know those little details. But I mean, just to start with the title, "Fistful of Doldrums." I mean, most people, like you said, the books on the cup final, there's been books on Roy Keane's promotion. It's normally kind of that, that kind of promotion season or that positive period that makes you want to kind of pick up that book. And you've got this title, Fistful of Doldrums, it's this kind of, I suppose, slightly negative time at the club, but a pivotal time. I mean, so I mean, is the title a little bit of a spoiler in that respect?
To some extent, it's but it's a bit bittersweet. In that it was agonising to miss out on promotion in '79, and but at the same time, I found it was there is an element of rose-tinted spectacles. And it's harking back to your youth when you're young and you want to be back there.
Yeah.
But I do regard that there's just a better time. Everything, you could name it, from music, TV, football. I mean, even if you went into the shop and you like your chocolate bars or your confectionery, you buy your Mars bar, I don't know how I can do it. There must be a scientific name for it, or a Twix bar. I can actually, if I close my eyes, you can remember how they tasted, and they tasted different, they tasted better, and you got about twice as much for your money as well.
Yeah. Well, with me, the example would be opening a pack of football cards, because I remember that smell.
Yes. Oh, the aroma, yes.
Yep, that's it. It used to hit you as soon as you opened a new pack of football cards. I remember the Pro Set ones in the 1990s, which I still have somewhere.
For me, it was the Panini in the late 70s, early 80s. That was cutting edge, because before then you were the one self-adhesive.
Well, I mean, just to put it this time into perspective, because when I was looking back, and we'll come on to, because obviously you start with that cup final side, but to put it in perspective, it was only the second time that we'd, as a club, had to try and get back up to the top flight. Do you think at this time, that you hear now and again now that, we belong in the top flight, but I think if you look, I did something a while back when I was looking since our first relegation, that our average finish to a season has been 8th in the second tier. But do you think around this time that people actually believed it and said, no, we, as Sunderland Football Club, belong in the top flight, and people were coming to terms with the fact that we weren't there?
Possibly it's a generational thing. Certainly myself, aged about 10 in this 77 period, I'd only ever known second division. So when we got promotion in '76, it was wonderful. And then they got relegated straight away. So it's still thought of ourselves as a second division club, aspiring to the first division. Whereas somebody who's used to the watching in the, they don't even have to go to the 30s under H. Carter and Bobby Gurney and the Championship and the Cup. They can maybe go back the 50s, the Bank of England team. when they were suddenly keep breaking transfer records and being fined for illegal payments, and they're buying players like Trevor Ford from Cardiff. I think it was from Aston Villa, or did he go to Cardiff? Anyway, they would probably regard it as in quotation marks a divine right to be in the top division.
Yeah, that's it. And then obviously, look, you start the book with that cup final team and saying that kind of that's where the story begins with Bob Stokoe coming in, and you essentially start off with that Bob Stokoe side that was really Alan Brown's side. That he kind of built those young players, but without getting into obviously the FA Cup success, because that was huge one-off games. Would you, because I remember speaking to Bill Bradshaw about this, and when he kind of had this strained kind of reaction to Bob Stokoe, he was like, obviously I love him like a brother and fantastic, he's got a statue, but if I really analyse it, should he have gotten that side promoted sooner?
Well, I'm not sure whether he could be criticised too greatly. I think Dennis Stewart summed it up nicely when he analysed the situation, that the team that won the cup was a good team. It just needed to be built upon and fortified, tinkered with perhaps. And he said that Bob Stokoe was more the case of he didn't feel comfortable bringing in bigger players. He felt more comfortable man managing less fated players. I mean, I give the example. This is moving on to after the promotion, but when they did get up, that he hesitated over signing Frank Worthington, as if Frank Worthington had too much chutzpah about him, self-confident,
baggage.
Baggage. That's a good word, because it's one that Leighton James applied to both himself and Frank Worthington. The people who kept Alan Derwin wasn't afraid of bringing people with, in quotation marks, baggage. Whereas Stokoe, he brought in like sort of Rod Belfit from I think from Leeds or Ipswich. I think it was Ipswich, and for 30,000, and it had worked with the cup final team. And they got that correct blend, but it needed to step up a level, and he didn't manage to achieve that. But of course, then when they did get promotion in 75, 76, it was as relatively solid champions, albeit built upon a really fantastic home record. Out of the 21 home league matches, it was 119, drew two against the two Bristol teams.
Yeah.
So, but as I call in the book, I think there were already storm clouds gathering, even in the midst of success, with Stokoe's feeling the pressure.
Yeah.
So I say that in the book, that when that final promotion in April 76 was achieved, it was more a sense of relief for Stokoe that he managed to. It had been that expectation level, which he'd felt the pressure of the expectation level to follow up the cup win with promotion.
Yeah.
And
because that's one of the running themes that you've got almost throughout the book, that you keep touching on it, that you talk about that cup final team, you talk about those players, and there's almost kind of an emotional pull with some of those players. There's or an emotional push or a pull, because you talk about the sale of the likes of Billy Hughes, which is almost too soon, you say. I think Vic Hallam, then he was scoring goals. And then there's the saga of Bobby Kerr, almost, you could argue, staying too long, and he wanted to try and get away. Do you think that it was a really difficult thing to do in terms of, that from a fan's point of view, and Bob Stokoe personally, almost kind of breaking up that side?
Sorry, there was a personal thing, did you say?
Yeah, just in terms of, that he wanted to hang on to those players because they'd done the job for him by winning the FA Cup, that it was difficult to get the timing right on when some of those players left.
Well, not really, because I think to some extent you'd say that the players that he was holding on to were quality. So for like Billy Hughes and Ian Porterfield and Dennis Chute raves about Ian Porterfield's his passing ability. But I think in fact, there's an argument to me that Hallam and Chewett and Porterfield could have done a job in the first division, and even there's a secondary argument to be made. Well, the players that were brought in, supposedly, that chivied or hastened their exit, were arguably, as you know, I think we're not going to be too forthright on this, were arguably inferior. I mean, there was some, what I would call almost panic buys by September, or less than, about 7 or 8 weeks into the new season. And when I think the likes of Alan Foggon and Bob Lee were brought in, you could say, no, are they an upgrade on Ian Porterfield and Billy Hughes? I think not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And, it's funny because, coming from, again, someone looking at the modern day, and you think that, when you think of a transfer saga, you think of, that some of the big ones that, went by and just seemed to last months and months. I remember, kind of rumours about David Beckham and all the kind of modern day players. But actually reading the book, you realise that that's maybe not necessarily a new thing, because I think the first third of the book, you keep updating us on the Graham Souness saga from Middlesbrough.
Yeah.
And I just find it quite interesting that looking back, that actually that's not a modern phenomenon.
Yes. But going against that, I mean, when I was living through the Ken Knighton era, I think with the exception of the saga over signing Claudio Marangoni, because that lingered on to do with visas and him taking out Italian citizenship, I think. Knighton was a bit of a revelation in that you often hadn't read about anything and any speculation, and suddenly my dad would get the morning paper, and Sunderland assigned John Hawley 200,000, Sunderland assigned Stan Cummins 300,000. They just seemed to come out of the blue. But yeah, looking back to different, I suppose it's different managers, different styles of the way they go about things. But and then there's an interesting quote. I don't think actually included in the book, but Alan Durbin, he was under so much media spotlight at times, and he had to face the cameras or the tape recorders, a few times a week, and he was running out of things to say, and he would be thinking, what can I give them today? And he might mention that he had 1 or 2 irons in the fire, and it was more for something to throw to the pack.
Yeah. And we talk about that promotion. Stokoe, won that league in 75-76, and then you think about that, and you write about it in the book again that Bob Stokoe famously suffered from those migraines, and the pressure seemed to build to get that side promoted. Now, obviously, it's all well and good looking in hindsight, but would you say that after finally getting Sunderland to the top flight, would you say Bob Stokoe was kind of tired at that point, and that he'd almost kind of put so much effort into getting us promoted that it had almost taken everything out of him to kind of follow it up the following season?
Yeah. he claimed he'd had a good holiday. He hadn't went on the Australasian tour, and he felt refreshed and ready to get down to work again. But I think there might be, and I think possibly I can identify with it being. I'm not going to be critical, because I think some of us are guilty of doing it ourselves. We're deluding ourselves. Right, we're reinvigorated. We're going to draw a line under that, fresh start, and it's you're almost trying to fool yourself. It's almost as if the job had become, in the first division with Sunderland, too big for him. But I don't want to sort of misanalyze it if that wasn't how he thought. But it might have, the job might have just become too big for him. He was late. I think this is one of the reasons possibly he brought in Ian McFarlane, and I think looking back, he regretted saying or promising McFarlane that the guy who's bringing in his first team coach from Manchester City would be given more of his head, that McFarlane would have more of a say in the team selection and perhaps player recruitment. And at the time that he recruited McFarlane, and this is what a GP once said to me, don't make big decisions when you're feeling unwell. So if Stokoe was suffering from these crippling migraines, he was not well, and then you make a decision like not offloading, but essentially dismissing Arthur Cox, and bringing in McFarlane and promising McFarlane that he's going to be given his head on team selection and player recruitment. Or probably looking back, he thought he regretted doing that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And how much of an impact did that have? Because you do mention again that, the Sunderland squad went to see Arthur Cox and presented him with a watch that he kept and said it was one of his kind of greatest things that he'd been kind of given in football by that team. And obviously he went through that experience of winning the cup. So do you think that had a huge impact towards the end?
Well, yeah, with hindsight, Arthur Cox should have been stayed at the club. But I mean, different players respond to different types of man management. Some need a bomb up the whatever, and others need, some players need a rocket, and others need the arm around the shoulder saying, "Look, you can do a job for me." And it makes them feel 10 feet tall, and they want to go out and run through brick walls for that manager. Yeah. But with McFarlane, it's as if he could rub pillars up the wrong way. Yes, sparks would fly, but sometimes negative sparks, and or in different terms. I mean, Dick Malone complained that he was almost embarrassed on tour, on the summer tour, when in the manner in which the players are in a lounge having a quiet drink, and McFarlane the language he would use to waitresses, for example, this would upset players like Malone. So I suppose it's a case of personalities as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and he ended up leaving Bob Stokoe after the home defeat against Aston Villa. Now, one thing I noticed about this was that it was Barry Siddle's debut, and Jimmy Montgomery wasn't in goal for this one. And it was a strange thing that I don't know whether it was just coincidence or what Bob Stokoe was thinking at the time, but obviously it's a strange thing when two great people of Sunderland AFC almost kind of end their Sunderland careers right at the same time like that, where in his last game, Bob Stokoe dropped Montgomery for Siddle, and then he left. I mean, was it because he won the cup and he was this huge figure? How much of a shock was it at the club when Bob Stokoe finally left?
I think it was a shock. It was. I think that if Sunderland had remained rooted at the bottom into the post Christmas say, it would be less of a shock. But it was only. I mean, it was the middle of October. I mean, less than 2 months into the season, so that it was a shock from the time. It seemed premature. So the Montgomery thing was. That came within days. I think Jim Montgomery and Pop Robson made their final Sunderland appearances, although Pop Robson obviously came back twice, in a League Cup defeat at Old Trafford, and that was only a few days earlier. So it was a shock, but I think it wouldn't. The fact of Stokoe going wouldn't have been as big a bombshell if it had been in the spring and Sunderland was still rooted in the say bottom couple of places.
That's it. Well, we were bottom at the time, and Bob Stokoe actually didn't. He ended up not winning a game in the top flight for Sunderland. But then we had to go on and find a manager. Now, I was looking again at this because I think Sunderland had I think it was 3 managers between I wanted to say 1928 and 1964. And so we weren't used to kind of looking for managers. It was almost a kind of a new thing that the club had to do, because these managers were usually kind of long serving. But this went on from the 18th of October, I think, till the beginning of December, this search. And it's the big one that people look back to because of Brian Clough. And I went back and I just looked at the initial search in 1972. Some of the names that were on that list, there was Billy Bingham on the list then. There was Brian Clough, Len Ashurst, Tommy Docherty, Dave Mackay, Charlie Hurley, Brian Doyle, Harry Potts, Jimmy Hagan. And they were possibly looking at Billy Elliott then to take the job. But there were some huge names back in 1972 when we did the search. And this time around, I mean, how much were people sure at the time? Because Brian Clough hadn't done what he did at Nottingham Forest yet. How much were people sure that, right, this time it's Brian Clough?
It didn't seem to crop up that much at all. With the word on the street, there wasn't a catalogue of candidates coming up. McFarlane had come in, they'd got a couple of wins, they'd won at Coventry, they'd beaten Tottenham at home, both those matches were 2-1. But there wasn't really a noticeable bounce. They already commenced this goalless run where they were struggling to find the net. But the real, whether there was just a ridiculous amount of, it was almost embarrassing, the players the managers that were approaching. That predominantly came after Adamson left. At this time, there wasn't a stronger list of runners and riders. I think it was only a few days before that Adamson's name started to get mentioned more. The Clough thing was a low profile. I think it was possibly kept under wraps a lot better, and that's partly because his star had waned. Like I say, there wasn't that clamour. His name hadn't really cropped up. There wasn't the clamour from the supporters, like there was 2 years later. But then it was. I think what I do say in the book is that a lot of people were wise after the event. However, I still make the argument that had it been known that only Adamson and Clough were down to for interview, then the supporter's voice would have been strongly coming down in Clough's favour, and it wouldn't have been a case of Wise after the event. They would have said, well, if nothing else, we'll rattle a few cages and shake everything up.
Yeah, and that time you do mention that the rumours were that Brian Clough hadn't turned up to the interview in the best of states, perhaps. I mean, that. Do you think if that was the case, do you think that you had Jimmy Adamson, who'd obviously been at Burnley a long time, and he had a completely different reputation to Brian Clough at the time? Do you think that was basically it? That they just thought, well, actually, from a board's point of view, Jimmy Adamson's going to be the almost the easy life.
Yes, and well, at least the three out of the 5 board of directors felt that. 2 obviously thought it was worth trying to, I don't know, tame the tiger. I don't know what, or they thought they could. Yeah, Adamson did. He still had high stock in the game. He's been a thinker. He did get offered the England position in the 60s, and he had a good youth policy at Burnley, and some very good players indeed rated him highly for his coaching ability. I mean, even players at Sunderland, players like Gary Rowell and Sean Elliott rated Adamson when he was still in his tracksuit, before he seemed to, I don't know, lose interest, for want of a better expression, and left it more to Dave Merrington.
Yeah,
he had a good reputation in the game, but certainly Brian Clough. I mean, the thing about Brian Clough possibly turning up for the interview was, I got that verbatim from people who were employed at the club at the time, and there was one director who had told these staff of the condition that he thought Clough had turned up in. But it's like anything. It wasn't exactly hearsay. I was being told this from former staff, but it's I don't like to put those down as absolute facts. It's open to interpretation.
Well, that's it. And I mean, potentially, if you're one of those board members who didn't make that decision, you're probably wanting to give some sort of good reason why you didn't.
Yes, excuse yourself. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Now, Jimmy Adamson got the job, and he didn't win. I don't think we scored in his first 9 league games, and I think there was 2 defeats before he arrived as well. But I mean, and then he brought what you term the Burnley bunch in there. I mean, at what point were the fans offside to start with on Jimmy Adamson, or was the fans kind of behind him right at the beginning?
Yes, and he came across his public persona, his image on post-match interviews on Match of the Day. He was ebullient. He was positive. He said, "I've got £5. I've put £5 to avoid relegation. I'm confident collecting my money." He sort of seemed to instill confidence that it was achievable. And regarding the players he initially brought in, Mick Doherty, Colin Waldron, and even later Doug Collins, some of these weren't directly from Burnley. I mean, Collins was from Plymouth. Mick Doherty at the time had gone to Manchester City, and Waldron was at Manchester United, but they'd been long-time servants under Waldron and under Adamson at Burnley. There was no sort of hoo-ha amongst the support regarding that. We were desperate, and for any light at the end of the tunnel. He brought Dave Merrington as his assistant as well, But it was mainly in the close season after following relegation, going into the second division, that there was resentment about the way things were going with the coaching staff, the scouting staff, were former Burnley, even the commercial manager who didn't prove himself popular with the Sunderland Supporters Association, and he had his own ideas about the club merchandise shop and what was to be sold in it. It just seemed it was overkill, and the quip that was going around is Sunderland going to be starting running out of claret and blue. So but in that first season in the first division, it was only 3 players. It didn't come directly from Burnley, and there was no resentment. People who were behind Adamson, and he was genuinely unlucky. Sunderland were unlucky. It was cruel. It was always an act of cruelty the way they got relegated.
Well, let's get into that, because actually you're right. I mean, it was an achievement to take it to the final day. I think it went on a run of winning 6 and 8, and then there was 1 defeat in the last 10. I think it was when I was taking a look at it. And unfortunately, that defeat obviously came on the last day of the season at Everton.
And it shouldn't have mattered. It should not have mattered.
Yeah. I mean, but I mean, let's kind of talk through that, because obviously it's the famous one, and look, we've got the playoffs coming up, and we're playing Coventry. There was a whole saga with the delaying of the game, and obviously afterwards it was all denied by Coventry and Jimmy Hill specifically. And then there was the score went up on the scoreboard, and they said that was a routine thing. That said it happens all the time. And then Coventry and Bristol City were telling each other off when they were kind of threatening each other's goal, I think, in that game. But I mean, should that have been looked at more by the Football Association, that whole scenario?
No, I mean, who can blame them? I mean, who can blame them? I'd have been I was equally miffed by what happened the previous, I think it was the previous Monday night, that Liverpool and Manchester United are going to be playing the FA Cup final, and Liverpool have the European Cup final, and they get to play 2 teams, 2 relegation rivals of Sunderland, West Ham and Bristol City. Now West Ham were almost safe. Pop Robson's goals helping them. That's another big issue in the book, the sale of Pop Robson. But it was the Bristol City that was the killer. When I remember as a child seeing knowing that Bristol City were playing Liverpool, and tuning into I think it was the 9 o'clock news that night, and waiting for the sport at the end, and seeing and not knowing the score, and then they're showing the goals, and they're saying, "Oh, Liverpool did this," and it was 1-1, and then they say, and what happened, and Bristol City beat a draw anything other than a Bristol City win, and Sunderland, it wouldn't have mattered. They could have been beaten 8-0 at Everton on Thursday night. It wouldn't have mattered, but that was the killer. But even after that, the permutation just seemed so unlikely. And then even on the night, Coventry get 2-0 up at home. So even halfway through the match, it just seemed it was almost unbelievable.
Well, it's Sunderland, isn't it? But just one thing about that loss at Everton, because I get the feeling in the book that the incident with Tony Towers you thought was quite a pivotal moment in Adamson's time at Sunderland.
Arguably. I don't think it came across living through it at the time. It wasn't as big. I think it was more that is something that came more from research. Now, okay, Tony Towers is his own perspective on that, and I think he was a highly opinionated person at the time. I mean, he was club captain as well. But But it did strike. The phrase I use in the book is it seemed to be a statement decision by Adamson, stamping his authority. I think he was complacent. This is where. Yes, I said it before. He was genuinely unlucky to not lead Sunderland to safety. But then he was complacent because I think he thought that even though it was mathematically possible to go down, he thought Sunderland were going to be safe that night. The permutations were not going to come to pass, and he could afford to leave Towers out, and then that would strengthen his hand in the dressing room. I don't think at the time he was necessarily intending to sell Towers, and he did, and Towers did get offered a rather healthy contract renewal in the summer, regardless. But I think he wanted to sort of just fortify his own position in the dressing room, and not felt that Towers was a strong personality who threatened that. But as I say, he was gambling with the club's future. And if that was the case, and if it was a statement, if it was an ego thing with Adamson to do that, then that's, I suppose that's almost unforgivable.
Yeah, that's it. Well, I mean, look, next season in Division 2, the way it all happened, like you said, we had to be really kind of one of the favourites, if not the favourites, to go back up to the top flight. And it was Adamson's first full season in charge. But then we start off and we win one game in the first 12, and that's including 2 cup ties against Middlesbrough. I mean, maybe I'm looking at this with my modern day hat on, but I was almost looking at this thinking, how did he survive that start to the season?
Well, we're living in an era. It's a different era. The managers were given more time. You could probably go through quite a few at other clubs as well who were struggling, who were persevered with, and then they bore fruit. Great success. And they say, well, if the board had blinked at such a point, what they would never have known what this success is. This is when people lose patience, or that's the expression I use. They lose their nerve and they blink. They did that with Alan Derwin when they sacked him. Yeah. So Adamson survived simply, I think, really because it was a different era, and because of he'd almost pulled off a miraculous escape. People still had retained a degree of confidence in him, as if it pulled things around, or he was capable at least of pulling things around. So there wasn't that clamour for him to. Whereas in more recent decades, by probably about, I don't know, October, November, if that, there would be, there'd be clamour to get shot.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, all the time you're kind of setting the scene in the background, because you've got you mentioned some quotes from Brian Clough at the time, because he's summing up North East football because he was flying with Nottingham Forest at the time, and he's saying that basically if it wasn't for Blythe, because you talk about Blythe's fantastic cup run at the time, but if it wasn't for Blythe, the region could be written off as a disaster area. And then you talk about an event in the North East and that he comes to, and you talk about the scratch movement, which I'd never actually heard of. Supporters Committee, Roker, Action, Taylor, Clough here. Which is
it's clunky at best.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wondered why I'd never heard of it, but it's probably because of that.
Contrived.
Yeah, and then, Adamson kept coming out saying he's not a quitter, I'm a fighter, and he actually said I'm a Geordie at one point, and he's still, and the crowds were slipping to 10 to 12,000 at Roker Park, and when the name of the book, you talk about similar things happening at St James's and Middlesbrough as well. But could you almost at the time, you could feel all of this just building up and kind of this animosity towards Jimmy Adamson, because just this cloud of Brian Clough just hung over everything.
Well, it's the it's fascinating. There's two parallel stories running because we get to see a mirror of Sunderland's travails, and at the same time, Nottingham Forest are pulling up trees in the first division and the League Cup, and it just emphasises what could have been, and it just the discrepancy between what Sunderland were achieving or not achieving is a more apt phrase, and what Nottingham Forest were doing, and it just underscored what was going on. Yeah.
I mean, so with Jimmy Adamson, could you just see him going further and further down, and almost kind of, like you talked about this loss of interest earlier on? Could you almost see that playing out?
Yeah, I think there was disquiet and frustration amongst the supporters. We were seeing other teams and other clubs making successful forays into the transfer market. And Sunderland just seemed to be so. And Adamson, okay, he did complain that the way of doing transfer deals and the negotiations had changed to how they'd been maybe the decade before, and they were more long-winded. But that wasn't really borne out with what was happening, it seemed, at other clubs. And they seemed to be bringing in players left, right and centre without any great hassle. And there was just these long sagas about players, and they weren't even big names. It was players who weren't even getting in the first team at their club, like Alan Green at Coventry City. And you think, well, Adamson ruled himself out for Alan Green. He goes to see him, doesn't impress, but then he goes back for him 2 months later because his price has dropped. I mean, if he wasn't good enough for Sunderland Football Club, then why does the fact that his price has dropped by £40,000 make him suddenly, I mean, it's like picking something up in the supermarket because it's on promotion. You didn't really want it.
Yeah, and Alan Curtis was the other one that you talk about with Swansea City, but he ends up limping along and finishing sixth, mainly courtesy because he won the 5 of the last 6, which I think masked a few issues, and went into his second full season, and he kind of limped along until October, kind of slightly up and down after winning the 2 of the first 6. But I just wanted to quickly talk about, before we get into Adamson leaving, talk about whether this was research or this was just in your head, because his penultimate game against Newcastle, Timeway Derby at Roker Park, you talked about the little waster, Bobby Thompson, potentially playing live at Roker Park, but the public address system wasn't good enough. I mean, that could have been a big famous moment at Roker Park if that had actually happened.
Yeah, I mean that was research. In fact, I didn't realise Bobby Thompson actually used to live in a house a few hundred yards away from where I am now. But because I think he lived in Sunderland for long stretches of his life. Yeah, he was, and his LP at the time was it was a bestseller. I remember being in the record shop in Sunderland when my dad bought his copy, and it was I probably know 1 or 2 people who can recite the little wasted routine on one side and the returning war hero on the other side, almost word for word. That was research. It wasn't a big thing, but I think it was thought that it might diffuse potential trouble in the spirit of Northeast camaraderie. Sounds a good theory.
That's it. I think my dad used to play drums in the social clubs around the Northeast, and till my dad was really old, I'm sure he still said Bobby Thompson owed him quite a few pints, but I think that's a completely different story. But yeah, again, kind of talking about Jimmy Adamson limping on, I think that game at Turf Moor kind of helped him limp on that little bit longer, which seemed, I mean, he said it was the proudest moment in football when he went there and won when we were down to 9 men at half time and it went in goalless.
It would have been, I think he would have had grounds to be even prouder if he delivered the halftime team talk.
Yeah.
Which there's an argument to be made that it was kidology or a bit of psychological play at work where he stormed out and said, you've given yourself an excuse more or less like to lose now. And it was Mick Doherty who grabbed everybody by the scruff of the neck and said, I'm not having that. And they devised a plan, a surprise plan, and Gary Rowell recounts the story and says Mick was great. And Gary Rowell, although he admired Adamson, even he's in two minds. My impression is that it was an act of petulance, angry petulance from Adamson, and but later after the victory, he's sort of basking in the glow of winning at his former club with 9 men. So I would come down in favour of it. It was the 9 men pulled themselves round with led by Mick Doherty and a rather surprising attitude to go out and attack with 9 men in the second half rather than load the defence.
Yeah. Well, and then it finally happens because you brilliantly described the day, but, following Jock Stein's departure from Leeds, and you also follow that thread through as well at the same time. And then the rumours begin. They wanted Adamson. Like I said, 25th of October, you describe it in the book brilliantly because just ridiculous day that kind of almost sums up Sunderland as a football club sometimes, when linked with Malcolm MacDonald in the morning and then by tea time you lose your manager to Leeds United, and then that same evening it's Ian Porterfield's testimonial at Roker Park, 13,000 turn out for, so a bit of a crazy day for you reporting on Sunderland, but specifically on Adamson, again reading the book, looking at his record and things like that, I'm kind of struggling to find what made him a target for Leeds United.
You're not the only one. Whether his stock was still high because he had. It had been impressive the way he revived Sunderland the previous season, and that was in Division 1. I think also there could have been an element where Leeds, after experiencing Clough, then they had a much milder personality, very knowledgeable, very capable Jimmy Armfield, but a different kind of manager. And then they had a Jock Stein, who was a big man, who wasn't a unanimous choice in the Leeds boardroom, despite them all saying he was at the end when they were under the steely gaze of Stein present in the room. Perhaps they thought Adamson, it's time for another controllable, non-controversial, easy life figure again, and he's available because he hadn't signed a contract. I mean, that's another irksome thing, that he joins Leeds United and suddenly now he feels he can commit himself to a contract. Now he's going to Leeds. He'll move house from Lancashire over to nearer Leeds, right, which he never moved into Sunderland. He was staying in digs. I mean, that's the same situation, I think, as Len Ashurst was when he was manager of Sunderland. It doesn't feel as if you could focus, almost as if you're fully committed, or you can focus when you've got you're divided from your family, which seemed to affect Adamson. but it was something that he decided on himself. It wasn't forced upon him.
Yeah.
But why, when Leeds have asked him to do these things, he's agreed to do them.
Yeah. And this is the point where I think your book almost turns into some sort of detective novel, because then the search is on for a new manager, which is an absolute saga in itself. And I hadn't actually realised until I read the book it went on like this. Dave Merrington's clearly told, you just wait and be, hold the reins while we go and get Brian Clough. Basically, well, that was it seems that's what the message comes across in terms of the board. But from my point of view, again, from what you've put, it just feels to me like Brian Clough's almost getting revenge, and he's almost getting his own back, and he just plays us. He's he almost it's almost like a pat on the head or something, and then it's almost like revenge that we didn't take him, those few years prior.
Yes, I think there's an element that he's toying with the board rather than not the Wearside public. He thought they were great, but the board, he probably had utter contempt for most directors and chairmen. But there was a point, I think, because of Brian Clough's contrary nature, where it was possible, because when Sunderland expressed their interest and the Forest Board weren't given formal permission for the Sunderland Board to approach and talk to Clough, and Clough didn't like that. So there was one point where he thought it was possible that in a fit of pique, and because Brian Clough didn't like being told that he couldn't speak to the club. He would like to speak to them, and then told the Sunderland Board maybe what they could do with their job now after they turned him down twice. Sacked him once when he was coach under George Hardwick, and on the youth team, and then turned him down when he was the front runner with Adamson. But other than that, I think, I mean, he's leading for. He's already started the European Cup run with Forest by this point, playing with packed houses, beating Liverpool. Was he? As I say, there's a couple of great pictures in the book, and I think, was he ever likely to leave all this?
No, well, exactly. What you've just said is exactly right. What I was thinking, and you were talking about him specifically playing the board and doing something to the board, not the Sunderland public. But could you not argue that the way he was almost playing the fiddle, and he was never denying it, and at one point he said it would cost this much, and in some ways he's almost leading on the Sunderland public that it might actually happen when really it was never going to happen.
Unless you don't know to what extent money would have talked if the cool million had been put in front of him. This isn't tied up in compensation in Nottingham Forest. Mm-hmm. This is aside from that. Yes, compensation would have to be paid to Forest, but £1 million salary or whatever, or with add-ons, whatever, for Clough to come to Roker Park, and that's the unknown, because I really, it's difficult to answer that, because I just, to what extent would a certain figure have made it just this? Coming to Roker Park is I can't turn it down. I can't turn down this figure in money.
Yeah, because I always find the Brian Clough conversation strange, because he, there's that quote, he would, crawl on broken glass and, to become the Sunderland manager and all this sort of stuff. But, if he'd really wanted to, because he'd become so successful, he could have. He could have made that choice. And it seemed to me that once he became successful in Nottingham Forest, he essentially always used that link to Sunderland almost to get himself better contracts, which again, I don't blame him for whatsoever. In a day and age where people, you got that money for retirement and people didn't earn huge amounts. He used that, I think, that link further on to get better contracts, get more money out of Nottingham Forest. But I don't think at any point did he want to come to Sunderland, because I honestly think if he did, he could have made the choice himself, because he was powerful enough to do that.
Yeah. Yes. So I think you're right. And what strengthens your argument is that there's a quote from Doug Weatherall that at one point, and I think this was, this might have been when Knighton was still there, a blank cheque was put before Clough. So he did have the opportunity, if he, to exactly as you say, if he had really wanted to come to Sunderland and do what he said he was capable of, the blank cheque, the money wasn't the object, because the blank cheque was put in front of him, according to Doug Weatherall, and I've no reason to doubt the story.
Yeah. Well, as you go through, you kind of almost, you go through each link. There's Bobby Moncur, there's Tommy Docherty, who was at Derby, there's Alan Dix at Bristol City, Newcastle-born Joan Barwell, who'd resigned from Peterborough at the time, and then I think we went back for later on when he was with somebody else, I think. Malcolm Allison, who was at Plymouth, who a few clubs were after. I think he ended up at Man City. Jeff Hurst, who was Telford player manager. Graham Taylor at Watford, who was coming through in the lower leagues at the time. And then there was the two big names on top of that, which were Laurie McMenemy and Bobby Robson as well. And there's this kind of part you describe in the book about Bobby Robson potentially having a gentleman's agreement. I mean, how close were we to getting the likes of Bobby Robson or Laurie McMenemy? I mean, were those on a gilt edge? Were those really close to signing their name on the dotted line?
McMenemy less so at the time. He did have the Northeast connection. It was tempting, but no, I don't. I think McMenemy was comfortable at Southampton, and there was still potential there. And no, not with McMenemy. I think the more likely one was Robson, and I think there was a spoken agreement that he was going to come. On a later date, when Robson was before he took the England job, I think this was after Knighton was sacked. Oh, yes, this was before Alan Durbin was appointed. I think Robson gave an interview. I remember watching it on, I think it was something on a grandstand, and they were talking about various things. And he held up his hand. He made a gap between his forefinger and his thumb with a minute amount of space between it. And he says, I came that close to agreeing to join Sunderland. And I think this was possibly the case back in 78, 79 as well. This was a quote from 81. But I think there was the same situation. And Ipswich were, they got this image as a sleepy Suffolk club at the time, and they weren't commanding. But he used it as a lever. I think there was an element of him, like Clough, using the Sunderland interest as a lever to try and spark some enthusiasm, for want of a better word, from the Forest and Ipswich public, and get them to attend matches. Well, it's the attendances at Roker Park and the passion of the supporters, and that's what attracted me. Now, of course, if we have a sellout at Forest for this European Cup tie and the season tickets get renewed, and similarly with Bobby Robson at Ipswich, it was almost as if he's trying to use a lever to improve his own club situation without really going to follow through and move to Sunderland. But I think with Robson there was this, and I don't pretend to get to the bottom of this in the book. I think that's something that's gone on behind closed doors. Yeah. There might be somebody out there who does know some inside information, but there seemed as if there was an agreement there, because they went back for somebody later on, and another figure did say that they'd been told that such and such was going to be coming in, and it obviously hadn't come to pass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, we went on for about 7 weeks with Merrington as caretaker, and they ended up with Billy Elliott, who was ready to take over at Darlington in Division 4. And then we asked him, obviously going back being Alan Brown's coach, and he was caretaker before Stokoe, and then he came back rather than taking over at Darlington. But again, it seems like that decision comes purely from Dave Merrington really putting pressure on the board, because he wanted to leave to go and join Jimmy Adamson, and he was basically coming out in public almost just saying he was sick of the whole situation.
Yeah, the word that keeps getting used is in limbo. And Knighton came out with the same thing when he wasn't given the job straight away, and he didn't know what his situation was. They used the expression they were left in limbo. It had become an embarrassment by that time. The number of candidates they were going through, and Merrington himself said it's Sunderland becoming embarrassing if once they set the stall out for these big names. McMenemy criticised the board, saying people have been in for me before, clubs have been in for me before, but they haven't broadcast the fact. Sunderland were broadcasting. I don't know whether it was to be seen to be doing something or trying, but by that point, I think they just needed a safe pair of hands to tide them over temporarily until the bigger name became available, or they could secure something that would satisfy supporters' expectations levels, and it still didn't happen.
Yeah. Is it just fair to say they made a complete hash of it?
Yeah, that's probably an understatement, yeah.
Because, I mean, but on one hand you go, well, they went for it. They had the ambition because they went for the biggest names, but they couldn't quite get them one way or another. But then everything just seemed to spiral. So you could argue on both counts. Yes, it's great that they were ambitious, but at the same time, it ended up just a chaotic process.
Yeah, but they're going for Clough after Clough has achieved great success. They went back for John Barnwell, Barnwell had actually applied for the job. And then his stock had risen. He'd moved from Peterborough. When he was Peterborough manager, he'd applied for the job and didn't get it. And then when he's done quite well at Wolves, Sunderland go back for him. And I think they went back at a rather inappropriate time, because he was recovering from a very serious car crash. Mm-hmm. So the timing of it was wrong on a couple of levels. But so from that point, they've made a hash of it, because they're going back to people who they've discounted in the past, and now they said, we'll go back to them because they've been turned down by people that they've made their interest in other big names, in inverted commas. They've made it public, and they've set themselves up to look rather bad going back for people that discarded in the past.
Yeah. Well, it ended up missed out on the last day again, talking about cruel, and it's again maybe typical Sunderland, you can say. But we were celebrating down at Wrexham after a 2-1 win, and then a late goal from Stoke kind of broke our hearts again.
5th of May 73, and 6 years later, it's completely different story. Absolutely, miserable day. And then watching the big match the following afternoon, I felt quite emotional. It was a brave, emotional performance. It just almost a tear in my eye, I think, watching it.
Yeah. Well, you've just touched on it there. I mean, as you wrote the book, could you feel like those emotions coming back? Because, again, the title Fistful of Doldrums, we had these kind of epic moments that if it just flipped the other way, the whole history of the club could have been different. I mean, did you start feeling all this as you were writing it?
I certainly wallowed in the warm glow of nostalgia. It was partly therapeutic and escapist for me. I allude to my difficult circumstances writing the book in the acknowledgement section. So it was great to escape from the here and now, back for a couple of hours into the late 70s. And yes, Wordsworth says, emotion recollected in tranquility. That's a famous expression of Wordsworth. Mm-hmm. Emotion recollected in tranquility. And yes, there are things that I'm coming across, not just the football, but the music and the TV. And yeah, you can feel that sort of warm, that element of emotion. It's like even after I'd stopped going to the football matches, and once that's ingrained in you, following Sunderland Football Club through your childhood and teenage and into your 20s. So I mean, if I'm watching, in the days when I did watch football, which hasn't been for several years now, but I was watching Match of the Day, and I did not know the scores because I hadn't followed the thing. But Sunderland are on Match of the Day, and I don't know the score, and they're winning, and they're 1-0 up or 2-1 up, and there's 2 or 3 minutes to go, and you can feel, because it's inbuilt, that tension rising in your body. Come on, get it away, get it clear. It's just like there's an element that can never leave you. I mean, I'm watching. This is the last couple of years I was still following, and I'm Dick Advocaat at Sunderland, and he's talking about going to Arsenal on the last away match, and it's the second last away match. There's 2 matches to go. And I was saying about the pressure and the tension. He says, and I think I'd want to run through brick walls for you. Mm. I'd put my head in where it hurts. And so he says, no, he says, we want to, these are the sort of places, Highbury, no, Arsenal weren't at Highbury, that's sure. That's sure. These are the kind of places we want to go. Mm. They just want you to test yourself. He said, you can almost feel, for the place, you'll be rising. Your shoulders will be broadening. We want to go out. These are the sort of places we want. This is where we want to be. These are the sort of places. These are the sort of situations we want to be. We get the good feeling, and you think, yes, that's the right attitude. Yeah.
It sounded like an episode of The Likely Lads when you were watching Match of the Day without knowing the score. But yeah, I mean, just summarising this kind of period. Going from the kind of relegation under Alan Brown and the cup final, I mean, was because the first relegation happened, then we got back. Do you think this period that you're talking about here, maybe if we'll stretch it out a little bit, going from that relegation, but this was where it really happened, that turning point where we became more of a yo-yo club rather than being regarded as a first division side?
Oh, yeah, the yo-yo status definitely came in this mid-70s, late period. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they were relegated in 69, 70, and then they got back 76, straight back down. Yeah, although really, I mean, they definitely got the label of the Yo-Yo Club. But thinking about it now, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't exactly. I think that was a bit, slightly unfair, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose is an argument that really, in terms of being an established top flight club, we haven't really recovered from that period.
There's an argument that can be made. I don't think it's easy for people to say, like, especially people like myself who think times were better in the past. But again, I don't want to hark back to another. But the Alan Durban, the Give Us Tomorrow Now, Leighton James said that Sunderland had never recovered from the sacking of Alan Durban. Now, yes, Leighton James was an opinionated person, but he was also very knowledgeable and very wise, and I certainly would never argue with Leighton James. so yes, I mean, taking it back to your point with the 70s, I think there can be an argument made, but it's easy for the likes of me, because I just think those 70s and 80s were better times.
Well, let's leave that argument with Leighton James then. Well, just on that, I mean, for you moving forward, I mean, have you got any more books planned? If I mean, maybe one following on from where you've left off with this one.
Oh, we've got for a few Doldrums more with Lee Van Cleef. I've got a couple of ideas. Again, they're both very early. Well, the 1980s. Ones could be like a similar theme to this one I've just written. Another would not be. Let's just put it like that. I also had an idea for an actually biography of a very interesting character, but it's been 6.5 years since a gap between these two books, various reasons, partially pandemic related, and I'm not bang on about that because hundreds of thousands of other people suffered psychologically through that period as well, and the lasting ramifications. So regarding new projects, I do have ideas, but it is difficult. I'll see how a domestic situation sometimes dictates what time I have available, and if I am going to start a new project, I like to fully commit. There's no half-hearted. I am a meticulous person by nature and a meticulous writer. I bring my academic training as well. In fact, with Fistful of Doldrums, I'm pleased with the final product. I think it is, if I'm allowed to say this, I think it's a high-quality piece of writing. But what bugs me is the glaring error that I spotted after it was too late to change the printers.
No.
When I mix up Alan Brown singular L and Alan Brown ALL, the manager of Blackpool Nottingham Forest, and that irks me. I think that's sloppy. Yeah. But apart from stuff like that, but that's a kind of writer, and I do like to be meticulous in detail. And I think I remember school, people at school with me didn't, when the fixture list came out, didn't used to believe that I'd memorised the fixture list. So I said, go on then, go on. And I'd get to about 7 or 8 matches through. I'd get to the end of September and they go, all right, okay. I believe you.
Well, if it's any consolation, I really didn't notice that the double L. So I'll if you hadn't said it, I don't think anyone would have known.
No, I'll mix Alan Brown, the former Sunderland manager, just briefly, just on one page. But that's the kind of thing that bugs me. Oh no, we can't have that.
Yeah, no, but if you do go forward with one of those projects, it obviously will be something to look forward to. But on that note, it just leaves me to say thank you very much, David. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we really appreciate your time as always.
Thank you for the opportunity to regress back to the 1970s. I will grab such an opportunity like lightning.
No, it's been absolutely brilliant. Thanks again. And thanks again to everyone for listening. Firstly, go out and buy David's book. As I said, A Fistful of Doldrums. Just to double check, David, I mean, I'm assuming you can buy it, at all usual places, shops, online.
All the usual, Amazon, Waterstones, Stokoe.co.uk have 2 good reviews in addition to the actual sale page. If anybody wants to read them, they're really well written. Mm-hmm. But I would say that, wouldn't I?
No, I'll second that as well. No, absolutely brilliant. I did it in 2 sittings. Highly recommend it to read, especially if you. Well, actually, I was going to say especially if you don't know about that era so much like me, but actually if you did live it through, I think you'll probably love it even more with all of the references to TV. But absolutely brilliant. And so, like I said, go out and buy David's book, all the usual places, The Fistful of Doldrums. And also, if you haven't looked back to our recent pods, we've spoken to Sky Sports EFL digital editor Simeon Golem. We've also released our first in a new series of what we're calling On This Week, which went out over the bank holiday. It was myself, Martin, Andrew and Kelvin, and we'll be back to talk all things from the Sunderland AFC historical vault every week with a bit of luck. And if that's not all, we'll have all of the build-up this week to our playoff semi-final against Coventry, which we're all looking forward to going through, of course. But from us, it's bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.